chapter. This is Unit 1. This is Chapter 4, the organization of musical sounds. And in this chapter, we have some very important key points. There's the term octave, half steps, whole step, chromatic scale, diatonic scale, major and minor scale. We're also going to learn the term sharp, flat. We're going to also learn about microtones, the tonic chord, active chords such as the dominant and subdominant, and we're also going to learn things about key being in a certain key, transposition, modulation, all that sort of stuff. This episode right here, this video might go a little long, so please bear with me on this. But the primary reason is that there's a lot of material here, and we got to get this all covered. The first thing that you need to be aware of is this term octave. Okay. Basically, if you look on page 17 in your book, first off, you're going to see a keyboard at the top of the book, okay, names and notes and intervals that they point out to you. And you'll notice that the keyboard has a bunch of white notes and it has black notes. The black notes repeat themselves over and over, and so do the white notes. So you have a pattern of 2 black notes and 3 black notes, okay? And then you have all your white notes all in between, okay? Now, you can play a certain scale pretty easily just by playing all the white notes, and we're going to talk about that in one moment. But the key thing I want you to be aware of is if you'll notice, it starts with a C on the left side, and go to the next one, that's another C. That's called an octave. You can tell that this one is lower than this one, right? Okay, so we call that an octave, O-C-T-A-V-E. And it says, it gives you an example of it, that if you play the same note, but just at a different level, you've got yourself an octave. All right, now, if you also look at your keyboard, you'll notice that if we go from the note C to the black note right next to it, which is listed as either D flat or C sharp, either one, okay, that is called a half step. That is the smallest interval that we have in Western music that we use. A half step, okay, and to the black note, to the next white note, the D flat to the D, okay, you'll notice that that's also a half step, okay. The other thing to be aware of is that if you'll notice the note E and F, you will see that E and F doesn't have a black note in between it, but the distance between those 2 notes is only a half step. E to F, and the same thing is true with the B to the C. You'll notice there's 2 white notes, they're right together. They are also only a half step apart. So please be aware of that sort of thing. Now, if you take 2 half steps, like C to D flat, and then you go D flat to C, okay, you'll notice that we have C to D, basically, going that way. 2 half steps will equal a whole step. Half, okay, so if I'm now going from C to D, I have a whole step, okay? So be aware of that little difference there, too. There's half steps and whole steps. The microtone that they mention in the book is interesting. The microtone is actually tones that are in between those half steps. Okay, if there was some way that I could actually bend the note just a little bit out of tune or something like that, we end up with microtone. And if you went to such places such as Iran or Iraq, you'll find that there's music over there that uses loads of those microtones. There's actually as many as 9 different tones in between one of our normal half steps. So that's a thing to be aware of. It's mostly found in non-Western music, okay? Now, they mentioned the chromatic scale at the bottom of page 16. The chromatic scale, they have it written out, actually, for you on page 17 at the top. If you just do all half steps going up or all half steps going down, you'll end up with what we call a chromatic scale. Or if I'm coming down. Okay, that's called the chromatic scale. All right, and you'll notice that we have these symbols that are there too. We have the symbol for sharp and we have the symbol for flat. Let me see if I can kind of show you that very quickly over here. Okay, a sharp, guys, looks like this. Okay, and you recognize it as a hashtag. Okay, But we've been using this thing now for over 1,000 years. So don't be thrown off by it. We have you guys beat by over 1,000 years. This is called a sharp in our language, okay? And the other one is called a flat. Looks like a B that's slightly on its side. I hope that this video is showing it the correct way. Then again, if it isn't, don't freak out. All I'm saying is that it looks like a B, but it's kind of leaning over a little bit, okay? And that's called a flat, F-L-A-T, okay? Now, major scale, okay? And they have the term key in here, and their definition is not bad. It says, when you listen to a composition in the key of C major, you hear a piece that is built around the central tone of C. Okay, and if I play all the white notes on the piano from C to C, I get a major scale. You can also say do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Okay, so the major scale is the one that you are most familiar with. All right, and they do mention that, and they give you some good ideas here. You'll notice again that they mention from E to F, mi to fa is a half step, and from T to do is also a half step. Those are two white notes that are adjacent to each other. There's no black note in between them. So be aware of that. The major scale, and I'm not going to ask this on the test, so don't panic or anything like that. But the major scale is made up of intervals that we've already learned. We've learned half steps and whole steps. So if we do it this way, and if you look at your keyboard, just look at all the white notes going from C to C, you're going to see C to D is a whole step, D to E is a whole step, E to F is a half step, F to G is a whole step, G to A is a whole step, A to B is a whole step, and B to C is a half step. And that makes up any major scale out there. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And if I start on any note, even a black note, if I follow those intervals, like maybe here from C sharp, okay, what I did there was C sharp to D sharp to E sharp to F sharp to G sharp to A sharp to B sharp to C sharp. If I follow the same intervals, I will get a major scale no matter what I start on, as long as I use those intervals found in the major scale. All right, and they also mention here a real important thing to keep in mind, and that is if you're thinking of another chord. The first chord that we ran across, which was in the last chapter, we talked about if we are playing in C major, we will go ahead and create a C major triad. We call that the tonic chord. The tonic chord. Tonic is home. Tonic means like if I'm in C major, then C is going to be my tonic. It's going to be the home. It's going to be what everything revolves around. Okay. They mention on here, they talk about the word dominant, okay? Well, the dominant is, if you count with the C, and again, stay on page 17 so you can take a look at this. If you're looking at your keyboard, if I go C to D to E to F to G, or if I give it numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 is the dominant. Okay, whatever key you are in, if you are on the 5th scale degree of that key, then you are on what we call the dominant. You have it listed here as sol, but you can also think of it as the dominant. The dominant is a very, very intense chord, because when we get to that chord, there's a very strong tendency for it to want to move on to something else, especially to resolve, such as something like this. It has a very strong tendency to want to resolve itself from dominant all the way to the tonic. Now they mention here, if you look at this at the top of page 18, that Joy to the World. And by the way, on the left side, you can see the little speaker. That means it's on. If you get into the thing that we talked about earlier, if you remember, we were talking about this thing right here. Okay, it's on your first page, and if you scrape off that silver lining there, you'll get a code. You go to the thing, you'll be able to hear every one of these excerpts right off of a real recording and stuff. Anyway, if you think of Joy to the World, we have Joy to the World. When we land on world, we're on the dominant. And the dominant has a very strong tendency to want to close down all the way back to the tonic, and it does. The Lord is. Okay? So be aware of that. Now, we talk about major scales. Okay? All right. However, you'll also notice that a lot of times major scales have sort of a happy sort of sound to it. Okay? Like this. Okay, it's got this real happy sort of go-lucky sort of sound. Okay? That's just it's the way we kind of feel it in the Western world. Now, if you don't want happy, you can go to another type of scale called a minor scale. That's in the middle of page 18. The minor scale, as I said, sounds quite different from the major. And the major reason for that is because it has a lowered, or what we call flatted, third note. Instead of going C, D, E, if you go back to page 17 and look at your keys, you can see C, D, E. Instead of going to that E, we go to the E flat, which is this. Okay? And once that happens, it changes the whole character of the sound. Instead of major, which is very happy sort of feel to it, now we suddenly get more serious. Okay? We end up with this sound. Okay? Instead of this sound. So imagine if I'm playing that little Mozart thing. Imagine that I change the thing by changing, instead of playing E natural, I start playing E flat. Okay? Now, if I do that, suddenly the whole character of the piece has changed. It's no longer that happy sort of sound. It's more of that more serious, intermediate, sadder sound, that sort of thing. Those are our two primary scales: major scale, minor scale. Okay, and sometimes we even change the minor. We actually have three different types of minors. I'm not going to get into that at all here, but that's the most common type that we usually end up with. And what that does is it creates a whole totally different kind of mood. If you look on page 19, you can see the difference between the two scales. Okay, we have the major scale, and they show you whole, half, whole, half. But when we do minor, it's going to be suddenly whole, half, half, whole. It's a different sort of sense and a different sort of feel. Now, they also mentioned at the bottom of page 18, they mentioned diatonic and chromatic. Okay, diatonic means that you basically are in your key. You don't usually play any kind of notes that are outside of the key area. So if I'm in C major, I'm going to just end up playing all notes that are in that C major scale. I'm not going to play any other notes in between. All right. If I want to go chromatic, which means color, as they mentioned here, then you start playing. If I'm playing that C major scale, which is all white notes, every now and then I start throwing in some black notes in the middle of it too, and that will start to create what we call a chromatic sense to the piece. All right, now they mention other scale types. Actually, if you have a piano at home or something like that, this is the easiest one. They talk about this thing called pentatonic scale. Okay, penta means five. Okay, it's like pentagon is a five-sided building. Pentatonic is a five-note scale, and it's basically, if you just go to all the black notes that you see there, you get a pentatonic scale, or I can start it anywhere actually. Okay, I can just do that if I just play the black notes. It is probably the most common thing you will ever hear. In fact, 9 out of 10 times, if you have just a bunch of children together and you start asking them to start creating a melody, most likely they're going to start moving around that pentatonic area. Okay, all sorts of things, but they'll start zeroing in on pentatonic because it's actually a scale that everything sounds kind of nice when you're putting it together. Okay? That's the 5-note scale. And they mentioned that African, Asian, Native American musics are filled with that sort of thing. We have also the tritonic scale that they mentioned, another non-Western scale type of tritonic. This is just a 3-note pattern. It's also found in the music of some African cultures. We have those microtones, we mentioned that before. Those are those notes that are in between our half steps and stuff. They mentioned another thing, and that is by inflection of pitch. If you listen to a lot of jazz, you'll hear jazz musicians lower their pitches by just bending them a little bit. That will give us a lot of microtones. It also gives us that thing called inflection. Finally, the major and minor system, as they mentioned here, and we kind of talked about this now a little bit. We've been talking about the tonic chord, okay, that's what we call the 1, and we use Roman numerals when we write this. So if it's the tonic chord and it's in the major mode, we use a Roman numeral 1, a large Roman numeral 1. If we're talking about the dominant chord, which is the chord that's 5 notes above that, so here's C, and then I go to the G, I end up with a dominant chord, okay? The dominant chord is written as a large 5, Roman numeral 5, okay? We also have another chord that's rather important, and that is the 4. So if I can go from C again, F, I get F, A, C for my chord, and that's the subdominant, okay? Sub means below. So if dominant is here, we are below the dominant, we get a subdominant chord, okay? And many tunes will work basically with just those 3 chords. The tonic, the dominant, and the subdominant. And they give you an example here. You can go ahead and listen to this on page 20, Battle Hymn of the Republic. And finally, we have the last part here, and that is keys as a form-building element, okay? And we can have things of what we call modulations. Modulations just means moving from one key to another key. I could be in C major, okay? And then I can suddenly throw in a completely different chord, and I'm suddenly in a new key area. And now I'm moving on. We call that a modulation. I've moved from one key to another key. We have transpositions. Transpositions are just basically where you can move. I can play something in C major like this, okay, or I can transpose it up a little bit higher to maybe D flat major, or even higher, D major. Okay, I can do whatever I want to do with it. Those are called transpositions. I'm just moving it from one key area to another key area. Okay, and that should do it for chapter 4. I'll see you on the next one, which will be chapter 5, musical texture.